Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Culture, Values and Purpose, How to Thrive in a Post-COVID World, hosted by Equilibrium Financial Planning. I'm Sean Gibb, I'm the Events and Marketing Manager at Pro Manchester. As I say, thanks for joining us today. Following the event, I will send out a post-event email. It'll contain any collateral and contact details from today's event. And it'll also include links to our other events and our new YouTube channel if you want to check out some of our previous webinars. So do click on and subscribe for that. It'll also contain a post-event feedback email, and these really do help us to structure and improve and continue to provide great content. So if you could reply to that feedback form, it would be really appreciated. Today's speakers are Colin Lawson, founder of Equilibrium, Gaynor Rigby, managing partner of Equilibrium, and Chris Brindley, MBE, non-executive partner of Equilibrium. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Colin.
Good morning. So today we're here to talk about all things relating to culture, values and purpose, and why we believe that by truly embracing them, your business, regardless of its shape or size or sector that it operates in, can thrive in a post-COVID world. And from my point of view, one of the things about COVID has been the sheer speed of the economic and behavioural impacts that we're seeing. And it's my view that it's likely to dramatically change human behaviour going forwards. And it feels to me like COVID has magnified many of the themes that were already there. And it's just escalated the pace of change dramatically, so that the changes that we were likely to see over a decade might actually take place over just a few short years. And I believe that one of those themes is that values, culture and purpose will become more and more important to staff, to clients and to suppliers. So today I want to discuss 5 key areas. Culture, values and purpose, just how important are they, and how important are they to a firm's success going forward? Culture, I mean, what exactly is it, and how do you build a good one? What's the starting point? I want to talk about values. What exactly are they? How on earth do you identify them? And then once you've identified them, how do you actually utilize them within your business? And I want to talk about purpose, just how powerful really can purpose be to an organization? And then finally, with it being so intangible, then once you've instigated it, once you've started to build it in a business, how do you actually measure it? How do you measure your progress from where you are today to where you want to be? And then how do you make sure that you stay there? Now, we've only got around about 45 minutes, so it's going to be fairly fast paced, but also we're going to try and keep it fairly fluid. And so I'm going to be posing various questions to Gaynor and to Chris. So guys, if you can limit your answers to around about 4 minutes for each section. I have a very high-tech glass, so I can encourage you to move around or move on if necessary. No doubt I'll dip in as well from time to time. And then at the end, we've allowed about 15 minutes for questions when Sean will be joining us again to moderate those. So, okay, let's get started. So, culture, values and purpose, just how important are they to an organisation, and why? What difference do you think getting it right can actually mean, especially even to the bottom line? Is it all just about fluffy, cuddly stuff and having slides and feel-good factors, or do you really think that it can impact the numbers that businesses traditionally focus on? And then I suppose ultimately, if businesses don't embrace it, then do you think they'll get left behind? Do you think it really is that important in the world that we're going to live in over the next decade? So Gaynor, if I could start with you, please, and maybe if you can touch on how important it's been for Equilibrium, especially during the lockdown phase.
Sure. Well, there were a lot of questions in there, so I will do my best to address each and every one of them. And my answers are going to come from the perspective of actually what we have done at Equilibrium and our personal ethos. So I think, we're here. The culture, values and purpose of a business are extremely important. They're a way of putting words around the intangible element and the essence of your business. Without it, it would just be easy to focus on the goals and the numbers and the targets and lose track of the human element, the reason why you do what you do. There is a great resource, Simon Sinek, about what is your why? So why are you doing what you do? And I think as a leader, it can make the biggest difference in how you bring your team along with you, how you articulate your passion, your point, why all their effort is worthwhile. It kind of really solidifies the teamwork and the community and the rallying around it. And our personal philosophy is that you put the team first. If you take care of the team then take care of your clients well, and then that in turn leads to the bottom line. So, you know, when you talk about taking care of your team, you know, you spend more time at work and with your colleagues than you probably do at home and with your family. So why wouldn't that working environment be a fulfilling place where you feel like you're really making a difference? And why wouldn't you want to be alongside people that share a same passion and a reason or want to achieve the same things that you do? So culture is about creating that environment, is to state the purpose and why you're doing what you're doing. The fluffy, cuddly stuff is, I think, from a team's perspective, is all about feeling valued and heard and important. And when people feel those things as a team member, then it's easy to get behind the goals and the targets for delivering to your clients. It's like they feel valuable, they feel their contribution is important, and then they get behind what it is that you're trying to deliver to the clients. And that ultimately then gives you a sustainable and healthy business. I think personally, it's, you know, going into COVID has been a difficult period, and I can't imagine what it would have been like for Equilibrium had we not had an established culture, that we weren't clear on our purpose, and that we weren't demonstrating our values. We've done a lot over this time period to look after our team. You know, we've done the nice fluffy stuff, but it's made sense to the team because we've always told them that we're, you know, we look after them, their well-being. We want them to feel like their contribution is important. Then those gifts that we've sent have made sense. Those gestures that we've made have made sense. It's made them feel part of the bigger group whilst working at home. When we've asked them to dig deep and do extra, to go the extra mile for us, it's made sense because our purpose and our values were already established. You know, when we've asked them to trust us because we've gone into uncharted territories because of all the uncertainty, they've trusted us because they trusted us before. So, you know, going into this, it's like if we did not have those foundations, if we didn't have that bedrock, I can't imagine how challenging that would have been for us, is to have tried to, you know, make those changes, pivot on, you know, to do with some of the business models, to get people to do extra, to, you know, go beyond, above and beyond to look after the clients, had we not got that foundation and kind of underpin of why we do what we do. You know, some of the things, we sent a survey out, we do a happy survey, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, and we sent one out during this period, and some of the things that came back, we did a word cloud, were that people felt supported and grateful and proud and happy and valued. And I think that really says a lot about what you can accomplish when you're in times like this, if you've got a really solid culture, purpose, and you know what your values are.
Brilliant, thank you, Gaynor. Sean, I'm just seeing a slide still on the screen. If we could take those down and just bring them up, I'm not sure what the audience is seeing, but just bring them up if Gaynor or Chris actually asked for them. So, okay, Chris, over to you. And I know that sports and rugby in particular is one of your passions, and so I'm interested at some point throughout the proceedings this morning if you can bring in the correlation maybe that you see around culture, values and purpose between sports and business. But over to you, Chris.
Oh, thanks, Colin, and thanks, Gaynor. I'm just going to reinforce lots of what Gaynor said. Whether it's sport or it's business, culture for me is the differentiating factor. I've seen business plans written by lots of people, and quite frankly, it's the execution that matters, and execution usually is a result of culture. So I'm reminded of the Peter Drucker quote that says, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And if you're going to talk about strategy at every board meeting or every leadership meeting that you've got, I'm just hoping that culture is also one of those headings, because culture, as I said earlier, is the differentiator. And if I look at sports, I'm going to recommend a book at the end of every question, Colin, because I just don't think we can talk about culture and do it justice in 45 minutes. So I'd recommend people look at a book by Bill Walsh called The Score Takes Care of Itself. Because ultimately, people at business might focus on profit and people in sport might focus on the results. The result is an outcome. The profit is an outcome. People need to understand what the inputs are. And ultimately, every business on this call is a people business. And it's people that deliver the outcomes. And it's culture that reflects how people behave. And if you've got values, those are the things that ultimately get tested in times of pressure. When everything's going well, funnily enough, people don't often revert to cultural values. But when things are tough, and they have been for the last 3 months, when things are uncertain, and they have been for the last 3 months, ultimately it's having a group of people that believe in the cause, the purpose, that understand that there is a framework that's known as values, and there is some freedom within that framework. But ultimately, people still want to do the right thing for themselves, the families, the right things for the colleagues, the right things for the customers, the right things for their business, and the right things for their community. So for me, it's everything. It really is. And Gaynor mentioned earlier Simon Sinek, and I'd recommend to everybody that they just go on YouTube and look at Sinek, because it is all about the why. Why do I get out of bed every morning? Why do I make the decision I do? And if your company, your business is underpinned on purpose and it's underpinned on values, so I can see it, taste it, hear it when I go into a business, then there's a really, really good chance that you actually haven't been damaged so much that you're not going to come out of this business. If anything, I'm seeing businesses that are coming out of this situation stronger, that will be stronger for the future. And it's because they've lived the values for the last few years, not they just decided to invent values over the last few weeks. Ultimately, you're not an overnight success. You have to build things, and culture, values, and purpose is what we should have been building for the last few years. And that's what gets tested. And, there's a great phrase in sport called teacup, and it stands for thinking correctly under pressure. And actually, what great values and what great businesses have been doing for the last few years is building ready for the moment. They didn't know what the moment exactly was, but guess what? They were ready to handle the tough times. And that's why I think what you, Gaynor, and the leadership team have done at Equilibrium is simply outstanding. And I can measure that against lots of other businesses that I've been involved with over the last few months, but also over the last few years.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate that. Okay, let's move on to the specific categories. Let's move on to culture. And I looked up in a dictionary, and it says the ideas, customs, and social behaviour of a particular people or society. So how do you identify in a business what that culture is? Then what key steps can you take to actually build it? So again, over to you, please, Gaynor.
So, Chris alluded to it around the fact that you have to spend time on it. So the same way that you would have sales as an agenda item, the same way that you have marketing as an agenda item, you have to have culture as an agenda item. And I'm big on analogies and metaphors. So to me, it's like a seed. You have to choose the seed, you got to plant it, and then you've got to nurture it and water it and tend to it. And that's really culture. It is not a full-grown plant that suddenly you buy and you plop in your garden. It's smaller than that, and you grow it and you get more people's input, and it starts to take on a life of its own. It's like a living organism, and that's probably the best way of looking at it, because it needs attention and love and effort. And we've had culture on our agenda for basically since I started at Equilibrium. And as the business has matured, it's become, the culture has matured. It's become more obvious. It's become more pronounced. We made a shift a few years ago that we don't have an HR department. We have a head of culture, because culture is about the team. It's not about the forms. It's not about your payroll. It's the team. It's making sure that we demonstrate that we keep feeding back examples, that we are looking for input around how we grow and how that flexes out. We kind of started 10 years ago we did a survey, and we've essentially done the same survey to our team at the same time of the year for the past 10 years. And we've used that as a barometer. It's an internal survey. We've used that as a barometer of areas that we needed to focus on, because with the best will in the world, you can think that you are demonstrating a value, or you think you've said what the purpose of the business is. But if people are not receiving it and understanding it, then you've not done it well enough. And there's no better way to find that out is to check in with the team. And so we've done that internally. And then 4 years ago, we started the Times 100 process. And I'm very proud to say that we've been in the top 10 for the past 4 years. And one of the benefits of that, whilst also, being a great recruitment tool, because we're an ace company to work for, it's also, there are 8 categories. And because the questions and the answers have broken down into the 8 questions, we've then been able to spend time on each of those areas to make sure that we are doing our best in those. So the categories are my manager. If you want to put the slide up, they're my manager, which is basically about how the team feel about their manager. It's about leadership. So do they know what's going on in the business? Are you visible? Are you sharing information? Some of the things that we've done are we do weekly videos out to the team, telling them where the company's at and what the goals are. We do monthly briefings in person. Well, we did in person to the team. We have a newsletter that goes out that all the departments tell everyone where we're up to. We have a quarterly briefing that lasts a little bit longer, and then we have an end of year. So we have grown into the leadership. We have been more visible. We have explained what our goals are. We've talked about the purpose. The company one is about, do people know what the business is for, and are they proud to work for you? And again, that can open up lots of questions, and you have to brainstorm and think about, would you say you're proud to work here? What are the things that you do that make you proud? And for us, that leads into our purpose. Personal growth, do people know what is expected of them? Are they getting constant feedback? You've got the team, which is basically, do they like their colleagues? Do you have any bad eggs or mood hoovers that you need to deal with because they're not in line with your culture? Fair deal, which is basically looking at your pay and what does their package look like, and the holidays and the bonus. And that again feeds into the culture. What is your culture? Are you a, chew them up and spit them out kind of culture? Or are you, look, you're an investment, we're going to give you resources, we're going to train you, we're going to provide personal growth opportunities, not just, exams within our particular industry. And then another thing that's become more important over the last little while is the giving something back, and it's about what you do for your community. So our purpose is to make people's lives better at Equilibrium. That's what we've said our purpose is. And that goes across 3 areas. It's our team. So as a leadership team, we look at how are we making our team's lives better. Our clients, how do we make their lives better? And also the bigger, wider community. We're in a fortunate position. So how do we give back? And so we encourage our team to get involved in our foundation. We encourage our team to participate in the Give As You Earn program. They get charity days. They're allowed to put charities forward, things that are important to them, because it's all about the whole person. And so that's an important focus for the business. And then well-being, another one that particularly over this period of time has become very important is that how do you support the general health and mental well-being of your team? And we have resources that we've put in place, from counselling to yoga sessions to meditation sessions to just generally exuding the fact that we actually really care about the team and we want the best for them. The unfortunate thing about culture is that there's not a template. It is not a structure. It's not a tick box situation. You don't get to the end and go, tick, I've done culture. It is, like I said at the beginning, this living, breathing organism that you need to keep going back to, and you need to keep pruning, and you need to keep adding to, and you need to keep going and going. Are we doing well here? Have we fallen off? Have we stopped doing what, you know, it worked so well, we stopped doing it and we've gone backwards? Like, you've got to just keep, you've just got to keep going back to it. It's a living thing.
Perfect. So we are running slightly behind on time.
Sorry.
So that's right. I didn't want to cut any of that off because it was all important. I'm sure we'll catch up as we go through. I didn't want to use the magic glass. So Chris, over to you without further ado.
And I think it's fascinating, isn't it? That I've been working with Equilibrium for just over 12 months, but everything I've learned in my 30-odd year career beforehand, because I'm obsessed with culture, manifests itself in Equilibrium. So let me just sort of give an alternative supporting concept from sport. So Humphrey Walters, who worked with Clive Woodward, as being the first team since 1966 to go and win a world tournament in 2003. England won the Rugby Union World Cup. And what did Clive Woodward and Humphrey Walters base their building a culture on? 3 things. Number 1, what's our cause? And the cause was to go out there in 2003 and win the Rugby Union World Cup in Australia. Number 2, pride in the badge. And I think we can talk about that a little bit later, time permitting, because ultimately everybody should have pride in the organisation that they work for and the colleagues that they work with. So pride in the badge is everything. And a little bit later, when we talk about measuring it, I can give you a really simple measure as to whether or not culture and pride in the badge is being lived day in, day out by colleagues. And the thirdly is to agree how you behave as a team. And you agree that up front. It should not be left to chance. So in sport and in businesses that I work with, we have a credo or we have a team code, and it's very overt, and we're able to judge whether or not we are moving towards a cause, having pride in the badge and behaving well with each other. That's values and behaviours. But how do you build one, Colin? And I'll just take a couple of minutes on this, if I can. And Sean, if you could show the slide of RICES, that'll be really helpful. Thank you. So ultimately, this is a question for everybody that's on the call today. Once you've established what your purpose is, what your values and behaviours are, how do you set about building it? And surely the first stage has to be, what do you recruit against? So I work for a business called Metrobank, which, won lots of awards for culture, and we recruited for attitude and we trained for skill. And our recruitment process was well documented. The journey was there to make sure that we recruited people that we knew would live our values. And we did that not just through interview, but psychometric profiling. The second part then is, once you've recruited them, and that's going to cost you some money, how good is your induction? And does your induction reflect what values and behaviours, what the cause is and what the purpose is that you want your business? Or do basically you give them a laptop, tell them where the toilet and the cafe is, and leave them to it? That's not culture, right? That's just dumping on someone. And part of induction, if you work with me, I'd be talking about the change curve, and actually, no matter who you are, any new venture into any new business is going to take time. And actually, you need to be a great coach or a great mentor and make sure that you're helping people through that induction phase. And if you worked again for me at Metrobank in induction, I'd talk to you about FIFO. And FIFO stands for fit in or go away. Because ultimately, if you can't live our values and you can't support our brand, I'd prefer it if you didn't work for me and go and ruin somebody else's brand instead. Then how do you make people competent? And what's your feedback and coaching culture about getting people to be the very, very best they can be? And then there'll be a group of people, only a group, that actually want to be operating at excellence. They want more responsibility. What's your program? And do you recognize people for living the values? Or is it all about the numbers? Because ultimately you can get numbers by lying, cheating and stealing. That's not very good for a business. So how do you measure people? And how do you make sure that values and behaviours are the first thing you measure? Because if you get that bit right, as I said earlier, the score looks after itself. And then what's your process for succession? And how do you put people on a succession plan? So I look at a 9-box grid based on values, behaviours and potential, as well as the ability to perform. And ultimately, if we start to measure on that from an appraisal basis and a succession basis, then your future leaders are going to be leaders in a business that are absolutely promoted and given responsibility based on culture, not performance. That way, the culture actually grows, just as Gaynor says, from a seed to a small plant, watered, nurtured, cared, to actually a plant that lasts for a long, long time. So that for me, Colin, would be about building a culture. And the book I would recommend for everybody on the call is a book called Legacy by James Kerr, which talks about culture in the All Blacks. And the All Blacks are the most successful sporting team in history. And it talks about sweeping the sheds, leaving the shirt in a better place. And it also talks about no dickheads.
Fantastic. And yeah, don't be a dick is also on our team credo. So apologies for that, people. Okay, let's move on to values. Let's try and cover off this section a little bit quicker, and then we've got more time for the purpose. But what exactly do we mean about values? How do you go about identifying them? Can you have too many, too few? And I suppose, can you impose them on people, and should you impose them on people? So over to you again.
Okay, so our values are integrity, always do the right thing, simplicity, simplify the complex, growth, never stop learning, and excellence, be the best. And I look at your values are your stars to steer by. They are your default proposition that when you have to make a decision, does it fit into one of these things? When you are, particularly through this period that we've been in, you've had, as a business owner, you have had to make a lot of decisions in the moment, and it's been far easier to do when you can revert back to, is it our core value? Does it sit with our integrity model? Does it sit with excellence? Are we continuing to grow? And so it makes that process easier. So for me, the analogy is your values are somehow a way of articulating your stars to steer by. When you're on your journey and you're heading, how do you know you're on the right path? How do you know that you're not veering off into a territory that you didn't want to go to? And you can't force the values onto someone, but like Chris said, you hire for people that align themselves with what your purpose and values are. You measured people against that. So part of the KPIs of the team and their personal bonus is are they demonstrating the values? Are they living our purpose? And it becomes a very simple conversation. It's not an arbitrary, well, I don't think you're doing a good job. It's not the work that you do and it's kind of who you are. It's far easier. It's clearer to have a conversation around, did you show integrity? Are you exhibiting excellence? Are you making people's lives better? So that becomes simpler. And again, the values are again a thing that you have to go back to and demonstrate and embed in your business. We've picked one of our values each quarter, and we've come up with exercises around it. We've asked people to nominate other team members when they've exhibited excellence, so that we start to embed it in, so that people start to look for that and have an expectation that that's what their colleagues and team members will do. We tell stories about the clients and when people have exhibited integrity, or how we made a particular decision that aligned with our values. So it's one of those things. You don't just decide a handful of words and then stick them on your wall and then that's it. It's more organic, and it again requires more nurturing and more explanation and more time to embed it in. And particularly if you're in a business that is growing, you need to keep embedding that in, because you can't be the holder as the business owner. You can't be the holder of the purpose and the values. Everybody has got to be the holder of the purpose and the values.
Cool. I love the stars to steer by concept, and I might be stealing your thunder for later on, but at Equilibrium we've got a very simple fee guarantee that says for all of our clients that if we haven't lived by our values and purpose, if we haven't done what we've promised, then you can have all your fees back in that year, and that is the small print version. And that means that it has to be our stars to steer by. It means that people have to live that, because if they don't, then it's going to cost the company an awful lot of money and reputation. But there we go. Sorry to interrupt. Okay, Chris, over to you, sir.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, so I'll talk about Metro Bank, and actually they had a mnemonic called Amaze, and I won't go into each one, Colin, because of time. But the thing that I think is really important, as Gaynor said, is not just having the mnemonic and having it on a wall. It's actually how do you bring it to life. So the mnemonic of Amaze, instead of Metro Bank having a head office, we had an Amaze Central. Instead of having a contact centre or a telephone handling unit, we had Amaze Direct. We didn't have appraisals, we had amazing reviews. And everybody had to provide examples of where they've been amazing. And so everybody had to do Amaze, and the ING was for the leaders. And the job of the leaders, we added the 3 extra ones, were to inspire, because actually people do need to be motivated day in, day out. To nurture, which was all about coaching and mentoring, day in, day out. And the G was for game change, because ultimately we were in a revolution. We were trying to revolutionize the banking industry. And actually the best thing to do is stay ahead of your competition. So we talked about amazing, but brought it to life. And the word culture is a derivative of cult. So I make no apology for us chanting our values every single day, because that helped people understand who we were, what our values were. And I challenge anybody to go into a Metro Bank and ask any colleague to sit there and say, can you explain what amazing means? And I'm pretty sure you'll get the full 8 parts of amazing, all of which are linked to our purpose, which was to revolutionize banking in the high street in the United Kingdom. So it's not just about having them, it's about role modeling them. And as you've said earlier, it's not just about the leaders, although they must. It is about everybody living them. And that goes back to the team code, the purpose, the values, the behaviours.
Yeah,
and the book to recommend, Colin, the book to recommend is The Leadership Skills of Attila the Hun by Wes Roberts. And people think Attila the Hun just went around killing people. He didn't. He built the most wonderful culture, and it was all based on values. And that book is 30 years old. The fact that it was around a few hundred years ago talks about this is just the success formula. It's all about culture.
Awesome. I think, the whole bit about living them is important, because I think if you had amazing and Amaze office, it's very easy for people to go, yeah, that's just twee. That's just kind of, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. But actually, if people are seen to be living it, then it comes to life, doesn't it?
And on that, Colin, if you weren't able to demonstrate your values by giving us specific examples, then quite frankly, you didn't get rewarded. And there'll be times where actually we might ask you to go and work for somebody else's business because you have to live our values.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Alrighty, well, we're getting close to the end. We're on to purpose next, the big one. So once you kind of identify the culture and the values, how does the business find its true purpose? What specific steps can you take? Is it just a mission statement in disguise? And how does it actually get built into the running of the business on a daily basis, Gaynor?
Okay, so our purpose is making people's lives better, and it was a process that we went to be able to articulate that, to get it in a sentence. And a book that I will recommend is a book called Vivid Vision by Cameron Herold. And it is basically an explanation of creating in writing in an A3 folded the vision of your business. And part of what he talks about in that is how to talk about your company in bringing it to life. Like, what is the point? And it's a document that you share with your team. So it goes beyond the mission statement. It's the explanation, it's the feeling, it's the what does it look like if you were describing it, what are the examples? And we had gone through that process earlier on, and it was easier then for us to roll into what the purpose was, because we'd done all this work from that book. Because our purpose is making people's lives better, then when you are demonstrating that, you can refer back to it. So when the crisis hit and we decided that making people's lives better was that we were going to call all of our clients in the weekend, and we've got 1,200 clients, and we basically said to the team, this is making people's lives better. this is a very uncertain time. We're managing people's money. They're going to want to hear from us. We've got to make all these calls over the weekend. Because we referred it back to this is making people's lives better, then everyone rallied around it. So there was no moaning and groaning and I don't understand why we're doing it and what's the point. The point was we make people's lives better. It was an easy decision. We're in wealth management. We do financial planning. Our job is not to make people more money, make wealthier people wealthier. Our job purpose is to make people's lives better. And that goes beyond making more money. That's into how they support their families, how they engage with the, charitable, how they want to give back. Our success is based on how many of our clients we can get to do something different that makes their life better and their community and their children and their families. And so it's easy to then have a conversation with the team about going the extra mile. It's not about just producing the report. It's about how did we make someone's life better? And you have to just keep embedding it. You've got to just keep looping back round. You've got to keep telling the stories. You've got to say when we did it. You've got to fess up when you didn't and fix it. And you be authentic with it and you just keep looping it round. And again, it can't just be the senior management leadership team that is going, well, this is what we do and why we do it. Everybody has to buy into it. And the more that you can articulate it and say it, the easier it is for people to kind of hook onto and to hitch the wagon to.
Well, I think just to add into that as well, sometimes it can be frustrating. Sometimes it can get in the way. I remember being at a senior team meeting and suggesting a new idea for kind of a new division that we could have. And it would have been profitable, it would have been easy to get off the ground, and it got X-nayed straight away because we went, but how does that make people's lives better? And it doesn't. So, so it's important that you do use it as a stance to steer by, both as a senior team and the whole team as well. That's brilliant. Okie dokie, Chris, what can you add to that?
Well, why don't we stop talking about business for a minute and talk about the great city of Manchester, which I'm a proud man, born and bred, will never leave. And when you look at the power of a cause or a purpose, I'll give you 3 examples that are really, really powerful. And for me, people fight for a right, but would die for a cause. And part of the culture is, are you prepared to create a cause that is so powerful? People would be prepared to die for. Now, I've never asked anyone to die in my business, but we've actually created a culture where people will go the extra mile. And the 3 examples from Manchester's past history. Number 1 is Peterloo, where 18 people lost their lives because 60,000 Mancunians gathered for parliamentary reform. Was parliamentary reform achieved? Yes, it was. So, those people's cause was so powerful. Secondly, let's remember that Emmeline Pankhurst came from Manchester, came from sort of Moss Side, Hume border, and actually she wanted a real cause, and that was for women to be given the vote. And again, suffragettes died in the aim of that cause. And then my favourite football team is Manchester United. The cause was to be, European Cup winners, and 8 players and staff, other staff lost their lives in the Munich air disaster of 1958. But 10 years later, at Wembley Stadium, Manchester United won the European Cup. And Manchester United believed in that cause when other clubs and even the Football Association didn't. So sometimes it is about creating that cause. And the best quote from sport is when Steve Redgrave said to the Olympic athletes before Sydney in 2000, if you're not going to Sydney to win a medal, then you're a tourist. And I think that's pretty powerful, which is, what are you going there to be? And the rowing team, funnily enough, went out there and encapsulated a phrase that said, will it make the boat go faster? And if the decision wasn't going to make the boat go faster, they just didn't do it. And that goes back to Gainer's North Star point. So I think having a really powerful purpose and cause can galvanise people to go out there and achieve some extraordinary things. And in the 8s in rowing in Sydney, the 8s won the gold medal, which they hadn't done since 1912. And all of that decision making about will it make the boat go faster, for me, really encapsulates decision making that's inextricably linked to values, behaviours, purpose and cause. I
love it. A bit concerning referring back to people dying again, Attila the Hun. Anyway, let's not go there.
Colin, there's 2 things I can guarantee for everybody. They're going to pay a lot of tax in life and they're going to die. So I'm happy to talk about it.
Anyway, let's move on to measurement. We know that in business that what gets measured gets done. This is obviously so incredibly intangible. So how do you go about measuring it? How do you go about keeping score again?
Like I said earlier, we have used surveys as part of our how do we measure it. So we do our internal survey every year. We look at the scores. We look at whether people are understanding, they get what the purpose is, they understand the values. And a big one for us is the times 100 and our score. If we dropped out of, to be quite frank, if we dropped out of the top 10, I would be wanting to go back and look and go, right, what has happened? Where are we falling down? What has got diluted? Where are we losing, as a gauge to go, how do we get ourselves back on track? I mean, if we basically dropped out of the top 100, there's something going horribly, horribly wrong. So for me, it is about measurement. We have a happiness survey that we also do internally as a bit of a pulse test as to whether throughout the year we're still getting it right, particularly in these circumstances. Again, you don't want to have done one in September and then only do it again in the following September, because there's a lot happened in the meanwhile. So are people feeling like they are still feel like they're being taken care of? Because our hierarchy is the team, the clients, the shareholders. So are the team feeling like? We survey our clients on a regular basis. We ask for feedback. Every 2 years we get an external, we do the CX Awards, which is Customer Service Awards, to check that we are continuing to deliver. So whatever measurement, and you can do it internally, you can do pulse tests, you can get external people to come in, you do need to measure it. And you use it as your own benchmark to go, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? And then you do it at a frequency that allows you to course correct back.
Cool.
Oh, one other thing, sorry. I have another book to recommend. So my book to recommend it's called Scaling Up by Vern Harnish. And essentially, I kind of have viewed this book as almost like the handbook on how to run a successful business. And there is an element in there about execution and things that you can put in place and how frequently you measure and what that might look like. There's basically 4 topics: people, strategy, execution, and cash. The people section in this book talks a lot about articulating your purpose and the values. So another good read. It's almost like a textbook. And execution, again, around how you measure those things that are important to you and the things that you need to measure in the business. So that would be my book recommend.
So I think that's 5 book recommendations, 1 TED talk, and books out there today. So Amazon should be doing some good business later on. So okay, over to you, Chris. We talk about, you mentioned before, the score takes care of itself, and obviously the score is very absolute in sporting terms and can be absolute in business terms as well. So again, how do you think businesses should measure themselves on culture?
Well, Colin, I think there's some real hard measures that would tell you if your culture's going the right way as well. So, I'm a real advocate of the balanced business scorecard. And as Gaynor said, there's different ways of measuring the people quadrant. I also like Glassdoor. I think Glassdoor is a really good measure of what both current and past colleagues say about you. And that influences people as to whether they're even going to apply to join your organisation. Then there's obviously what customers say about you. So your customer effort score or your net promoter score. So again, I think they're real good proxies for your culture. I think whether or not you've got a first time yield good that says you've got people coming up with ideas. I know that Equilibrium have just been nominated for an innovation award. So that's great news that it's not just about, inverted commas, soft and fluffy stuff, but actually people coming up with ideas how to make customers and colleagues and clients' lives better. And ultimately, the financials, you should be getting more customers doing more business with you. It's as simple as that if you've got a good culture. So, there's some good proxies. And how can leaders go about doing this really quickly? So again, instead of waiting for the outputs of all the surveys and awards, etc., what can good leaders do? The 2 words I'd ask them to do is ask and observe. Ask people what the values are. Ask people what the purpose is. Because if people in your team can't give you the answer verbatim of what the purpose and the values are, and examples of when they've lived them, there's a fair chance they're never going to wake up one morning, know them and live them. So you've got to ask. And then secondly, words are cheap. People have told me throughout my career how much they've cared. And then when I've watched them in action, they've demonstrated how little they care. So observe as a leader what people are doing to demonstrate to colleagues, to customers, to community, to business, to themselves and the families, the actual behaviours that demonstrate that the culture is alive and well. The first thing I do when I go into a business is sit down with the leadership team, the top team, ask them to get a piece of paper out, a pen, put the name on the top, and then write down the mission, the vision, and the values. It's like watching goldfish gasping for breath because they don't know them in lots of cases. And if the leadership team can't know them, how can they observe whether they're happening? Because some leaders think values are for other people in the business, not themselves. So ask and observe, ask and observe, ask and observe. What people say, what people do. They're great indicators as to whether or not you're on the right track for culture. And the book I would recommend is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, which many will know. But in the last few months, where perhaps many of us have been doing homeschooling, there's another Stephen Covey book that says the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families. That might be worth a read as well.
All right.
Because culture happens at home as well as at work.
And that's it. So 6 books then. And you mentioned the Innovation Award, and innovation was actually one of our 4 values. And we got challenged by a couple of team members that whilst we're innovative as a company, that they couldn't be innovative in their roles. And that led us to change it across to excellence. And so I think it's important. It's a fluid thing, that things can change. So again, to have that culture that somebody can challenge you on your values and actually then be heard and to change them says a lot as well. Well done, guys. By the miracle of some good planning, we're only 2 minutes late, so I think that's probably my fault. So hopefully we can now hand over to Sean for some good questions.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for that. I thought it was really, really great stuff, and you've been lighting up the switchboards, as they say. We've got lots of questions in. People absolutely loving all of the book recommendations, and they've asked if we can send out a suggested book list as part of our post-event email, which I'm sure we absolutely can do. Loads of questions, far too many that unfortunately I'm not going to be able to get through, but I will send them all on so you guys can read the questions.
So maybe sort of you can kind of group them into some categories and some issues that might be coming out.
Yeah, and some have been answered along the way as well. So, but yeah, grouping a couple together. Let's go with where does dealing with poor performance fit within an inclusive and high-performing culture?
I'll start with that because I'll just share a really quick story. I happened to be a leader of a team when I took over, and part of my regional directors had been best man at his wedding, godchild to his son. And when we were talking about culture and performance in front of 200 people, John said, "I know that if I didn't live the values, Chris would sack me." And somebody said, "Chris Brindley, how do you sleep at night?" And my answer was, "Like a baby." For the simple reason, I care about the team and the cause more than any individual. And if the individual chooses, and it is a choice, not to live by the agreed behaviours and the values, by not live towards their cause, if they're diminishing the brand, then ultimately they will ruin the business. And therefore I said, everyone knows how to behave around here. It's a conscious choice that you do or you don't. And if you don't, then I will take responsibility for the wider team rather than one individual. And in sport, the most recognised person for doing that is Sir Alex Ferguson. David Beckham, one of the greatest players in the team, because he didn't live by the team code, went. Ruud van Nistelrooy, who didn't live by the team code, went. And ultimately, the wide responsibility for team has to be greater than any individual, especially when that individual chooses not to live the values. I will coach and support anybody who wants to be better at who they are and what they do. When they choose not to want to learn or be better at who they are and what they do, I think then it's best if they go and work somewhere else and ruin their brand.
Good answer.
Let's see. When building a great culture, what obstacles got in your way and how did you overcome them?
Are you, Colin, or me? Who do you want?
You can take it again if you're out.
What obstacles got in the way? I think we're fallible like everyone else, and so we did along the way we did things that worked very, very well, like we did regular briefings, and then it worked so well that we stopped doing them, and then we kind of lilted off where we'd done a great job of telling everyone where we were going. This was maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, and what the targets were and what was going on in the business, and then we lilted away from that, but it came up in the surveys that people didn't feel like they knew what was going on, and so we've reverted back, and I've got more discipline and more creativity around how we articulate that and the mediums that we use to keep people informed and to keep making it interesting. So I would say that was one of the challenges, and the other one is really just the journey of being able to articulate what the purpose and what the values are. It was very much held probably with Colin and I in the beginning, but that doesn't allow for growth in an organization, and that doesn't allow for getting bigger. And so when we were able to articulate that better, that meant then other people buy in and start to hold the line on it, and other people to account. And then when we've done even better, then the whole team are holding each other to account, and therefore then you start to get some momentum. It is not one person trying to push or hold something together. Everybody then is going in the same direction, and you get momentum. You get momentum around it.
And I'd add in as well that I mean, it's almost the answer to the last question, but it's people. It's getting rid of those toxic people off the bat.
Yes.
Those ones that aren't doing it, and it can be hard because they might have been around for years. They might have been toxic for years. You're just going to put up with it because actually they're good at their job, but being good at your job and being toxic in the workforce and not living by the values just isn't good enough. In fact, you can be absolutely outstanding at your job and be a dick, and you shouldn't work here anymore. So it was getting over that, I think, as well, wasn't it?
It was. What a great analogy for that was, I heard somewhere along the way, was if you imagine you have a glass of water and you drop into it black ink, and it can just be one drop, but it gets into everywhere else. And so your mood hoovers and the people with the bad attitudes and the people that are not aligned to your values are that drop of black ink. They're the start of something that takes over. And so the view is, it's not personal to them, it's not them back, but you have a culture, you have a responsibility to everyone else to maintain it, and you have to deal with it. Everyone gets an opportunity, like Chris said, to get in line, but ultimately, if it doesn't work for you and they are taking something away from what you're trying to accomplish, then they need to go.
And another top 10 Brindleyism when it comes to teams, better a hole than a bleep hole, I think is the expression. So anyway, moving on.
So we've got, how long would you expect it to take to embed a great culture, and does this vary depending on the size of the team?
Chris, do you want to take that?
Yeah, ultimately, it's often easier to start building a culture with a small number, because actually you can almost put your arms around everybody. You can do your observation, you can do your listing. The answer is it does take a while to get a culture, because it's all about communication, observation, feedback, communication, observation, feedback, communication, observation, feedback. And I really would challenge people on the call, and it is a challenge. When was the last time you actually sat and observed people doing the job and measuring and observing and giving feedback, how well they not only did the technical stuff, but how well they prepared before any meeting, before any client interview, before any colleague briefing? Actually, what notes did they make? What did they understand? What action did they take? So it does take time, because learning is a journey, and you can't shortcut it necessarily. You can't put a microchip in everybody's brain and program it to say, this is how you're going to behave. So it's always communication, and communication's two-way, because that's how you get the very best outcome, and it's high support and high challenge. That's what works in sport. But it's always around culture, as Gaynor said earlier. It isn't something that you say, we've done it now. The world is constantly changing. And if the pace of change outside is faster than the pace of change inside, disaster's imminent. And look at Woolworths, look at Kodak, all of those organisations that didn't look into the future and weren't underpinned by great culture. So it takes time. But you can start to get small wins, small activity, small results really quickly. Because by saying from tomorrow, can we behave like this? And the answer is yes or no. And once you've coached somebody, when you've observed them, when you give feedback, quite frankly, recognise that, frame it and say, congratulations, you've reached a new standard, keep that going. And then can you come back to me and see if there's any other ways that you want to be better at who you are and what you do, and anything you can recommend the business should be. So it can start, but Jim Collins talks in Good to Great about moving a flywheel. It takes a while at the start, but once you get that flywheel moving, the great news is you can move that same 1-ton flywheel that you really struggle to do at the start with one finger. But guess what? You've got to put the hard work in first. Too many people want the success before the work. The only place where success comes before work is in the dictionary.
There you go. And another nice book recommendation in there as well, Chris.
The competition.
Yeah, I think you're winning.
So, Sean, do we have any more? I mean, we're getting close to time anyway, but if we, I think we've got one, we can squeeze in one more if need be.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, again, clustering a few together, but a few people have said, what do you see as the biggest challenges in regards to people when they return, in regards to culture and values when they return to work after this current lockdown that we find ourselves in?
Gary, do you want to take that?
Can you just repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So what are the biggest challenges facing people when they return to work?
Okay. So I think if you look at, you put your team first, your team look after your clients create the shareholder. I think we've got to be very sensitive right now to where everyone is on this journey of wanting to come back to work. And I think if you're an organization that puts your team first, there will not be deadlines in place of we're all coming back at this point. Everyone's circumstances are different. And so I would suggest that the plan needs to be fluid. So we're taking the approach of we are doing our risk assessments and what do we need to put in place and what rules, and we're going to create a handbook for people to go back in. There'll be a video to explain how we, we think being in our kitchen and making brews and all of that will be, and we're going to phase it. So 15% of the workforce, then 35 at the next stage, and then up to 65. But I don't have a deadline of going, it's 15 by this date, it's 35 by this date. It's going to be very fluid, the same way that we kind of ended up in lockdown very quickly. Things are changing quickly back the other way, and I think everyone's on a different journey personally, and their circumstances are very different. And I would not want, there is no rush for us to be back in the office. We've done a fantastic job of servicing our clients remotely, and therefore the transition back into the office will be at a pace that works for the individuals. We've already started surveying, asking when people would like to be, what phase they would like to be in coming back. We'll then look at the numbers and looking at the social distancing and desks and what we can realistically have in without it encroaching on people's confidence and fear. So I think if you look at it from a staff led, that it comes with making people's lives better. I don't want to put anyone in a position where you're increasing anxiety and you're tapping into fears or however they are, home circumstances. We will go at a speed that works for each individual.
I think if I can add to that as well, we were discussing actually yesterday, a couple of team around if everybody came back into work all in one go on one day, it would almost feel a bit overwhelming for some people. It'd be like, so to actually phase that back in is important. And then I think the last point on our team charter is that we celebrate success always. And I think we need to have a big celebration when we get back in, because sure, turnover's down, sure, many things are down, but actually I think we can say for sure that we've been successful throughout this period of challenge and brought new innovation. So I think to celebrate that in some major way, sorry team that are listening, not giving anything away, but would be an awesome thing to do. And then again, regrouping around our big hairy audacious goals. So we've got our 10-year vision. We're 2 years into that. Obviously, because of COVID, we're behind. So do we make the boat go faster, or do we move the finish line? And hopefully we can make the boat go faster, but it's regrouping around those targets as well. So as they target, celebrate, and listen to the team.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us up to bang on 1 hour and 14 seconds by my clock. So 50 minutes for questions and 45 minutes. So Sean, unless any other burning ones, are you happy to wrap up?
Yeah, no, let's wrap up. I'm happy for you to close out, but yeah, just from a Pro Manchester point of view, thanks everyone for attending today. It's been a really good session, and yes, look out for your post-event email tomorrow.
Great.
Cool. So thank you, Gaynor. Thank you, Chris. I think it's been a fun session. I've enjoyed it. And hopefully the book list will be useful for people. If you have got any other questions you want to get in touch, you can always visit the Equilibrium Financial Planning website. There's the Ask Us email on there, and if you've got any questions, we'll get back to you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Cheers,
a lot,
everyone.
everybody.
Have a great rest of the week. Bye bye.